All right, all right. Welcome to another week of Business to Benefits. I'm Jerry Kane with the law offices of Gerald Kane, your lawyer for life. And this is all about businesses and benefits for individuals and businesses. And I'm so excited to be here again today with you to share some important information about planning for businesses, making sure that you have the proper structure in place and you have the right plan to be able to transfer the business to the next generation. So many of you listening today probably own a family business. If so, you have plenty of company. More than 90% of US businesses are family businesses. Out of the Fortune 500, 150 are family businesses. Now, would you like to hear some really startling statistics? Only 30% of family businesses are going to survive into the second generation, 12% to the third generation, and 4% to the fourth generation. Scary statistics, aren't they? All that blood, sweat, and tears that you put into building the family business just vaporized, just gone. Wondering how this happens? The number one reason is lack of family succession planning. Now, part of a proper succession plan relies on having a properly structured business from the beginning to ensure that, if you pass away, that everything is in place to properly address the succession of the business to the next generation. The proper structure can also allow for retirement, allow you to obtain proper tax advantages and provide asset protection. Now, let's look at the life cycle of a business. When you start a business, you just kind of want to get down to business, get to work. You're concentrating on what kind of products am I going to sell? Who am I going to market to? Who are my customers? Getting in place vendor agreements. Where am I going to set up the business? And all kinds of things that you're concerned about. Oftentimes people just want to get down to business, and they often business owners overlook the legal structure of the business. You might just register with the state and get a business license with the city, but there's really no structure to protect you as a business owner. There's no asset protection, and you're not really structuring for an exit strategy, are you? And are you growing to sell the business? Are you growing the business to be able to pass it on to your family? Now, what are the questions you should be asking on how you form the business? If you're a partner or by yourself, we often overlook the legal framework of how business is going to operate. Common issues that come up that cause businesses to fail: financial mismanagement between partners and fallout, relationship problems between partners, breaches of contract between partners, and how's that going to be handled? What happens if the business owners die? Probate, your business is going to end up in probate. You can't make paychecks. You can't work with vendors. You can't collect assets and access bank accounts. The majority of businesses are closely held businesses. Over 80% of businesses that are established and successful, survive for decades. These businesses survive for decades of being in business. And over 80% are completely gone by the third generation. You've probably heard of Gucci. Gucci's an example of this, due to not having a proper succession plan in place. Gucci didn't survive past the third generation. There's many examples of this where this has happened. And you need to think about, what happens if you sell the business to an acquisition or a partner or transfer it to your family. If you don't have something in writing, the statistic is that the business won't survive. Big companies, they don't survive usually because of lack of innovation or because they can't compete. Many times it's because they don't have the proper structure in place to begin with. So, let's kind of look at the life cycle of business. As you start off, you're looking at, just forming the business, getting the business started, making sure you have the right kind of structure in place. And again, just trying to get off to business, marketing, vendors. And then, you go through the growth phase where you're growing the business. And eventually, you're going to get to the point where, the business kind of plateaus and you're just maintaining it. And it's kind of in, automatic overdrive at that point. It's just kind of functioning on its own and everything's in place. All the systems are in place. But eventually you're going to have to transfer that business to the next generation, or transfer it to, a key individual or somebody within the business, or sell it and transfer the business. And if you don't have a plan to be able to do that, an exit strategy to get out of the business, to be able to retire one day when you need to or want to, or be able to make sure that you pass on the business to your family, when it stays intact, you could have some problems. So let's take a look at, the top types of business structures that you might have when you're starting a business. A lot of times, people, again, they overlook having the right business structure. They might start off and just kind of think, okay, I'm going to get a business name. Maybe they go file a DBA, which is, I'm doing business as a certain type. This is the name of the company. But you're what's called a sole proprietorship. There's no real legal entity that you formed. There's nothing formal in place. And, there's nothing really there to protect the business from any potential creditors. There's no asset protection. And there's really no tax advantages in being a sole proprietorship. You may, decide you're going to take on a partner and form a partnership. And this is almost the same thing as a sole proprietorship, except you have partners. Again, there's no real tax advantages. There's no real asset protection. So the first type of business you might look at forming that actually is a actual entity where you file something with the state is called a LLC. And a LLC is what's known as a limited liability company. You'll have, members within the limited liability company. It's a lot like a partnership where you have many individuals working together. But unlike a partnership where there's no real asset protection in a partnership, in an LLC, properly structured, you do have limited liability as long as you keep up what we call the corporate veil. And limited liability means that, what happens inside the corporation or LLC stays inside the LLC or corporation, and what happens outside stays outside. So, if something happens within the entity, somebody, does something improper and gets sued for mismanagement or, for whatever reason, they can't go after the assets outside of the LLC. They can only go after the assets inside the LLC, which is, really important in that situation, as long as you keep up the corporate veil. There's this inside out, outside in protection. So having the corporate veil, basically ensures that you have this protection. And there's a few ingredients, 3 important ingredients. First of all, it has to be properly structured and good standing with the state. So you're going to structure and register with the state and keep that information updated. You've got to have proper accounting practices, which really means that you're treating the business like a business and you're keeping your business assets separate from your personal assets. And the expenses of the business are business expenses, and you're not running personal expenses through the business. This isn't too difficult for most people if they've set things up, with an accountant or a bookkeeper to help keep track of that, or maybe one of the different types of programs out there that are available. And you make sure you have a bank account where you maintain company funds, keep those funds separate from your own personal funds. And also the third ingredient is having proper legal documents in place. This can be contracts, liability waivers, contracts with vendors and vendees. And, the contract's going to be your first line of defense against any potential action against the corporation. You're also going to look at, with a corporation, you're going to look for bylaws. With an LLC, we have what's called a operating agreement to determine that, the structure is in place properly. And having this asset protection is really kind of important. We were working with one of our clients who was a mechanic, and he was operating as a sole proprietorship. And basically one of his friends brought his car into the shop, and he was working on the car. Decided he was going to loan him one of his personal vehicles because he didn't have a vehicle for the weekend, and he felt bad for him. And it's kind of a rainy day here in Southern California. Sometimes it rains here in Southern California, but not too often. And he's driving along, and there's this little lady crossing the street, and he isn't able to hit the brakes in time. He just barely taps her, knocks her over. $1.5 million in brain surgery. His personal insurance paid out to the maximum extent possible. His car insurance paid out to the maximum extent possible. He was still potentially liable on the hook for over $500,000 in potential liability and exposure. An example of why you want to have the proper structure in place, both for asset protection as well as to make sure that the business can live on well beyond you. In an LLC, you get the choice of either being taxed as a C Corp or an S Corp, or as a partnership. So you get to choose how you would like the LLC to be taxed as well. Now, a corporation is a little bit more formal than an LLC. It has a few more requirements. You have to do bylaws and annual minutes. But a corporate structure also can be a good choice as an entity for your business. And whether you're a C Corp or an S Corp, it's not an actual type of corporation. It's really a tax election. So all corporations start off as C corporations, and you get a chance to, if you want to, elect for S status. And basically, as an S corporation, it means that all of the profits that flow out directly to the shareholders of the corporation and are picked up on their personal return, rather than the profits staying inside the corporation and possibly double taxed inside the corporation. But whether you should be a C corporation or an S corporation, is something that you would sit down and discuss with your attorney and with your tax advisor to determine that. And beyond that, you may want some additional asset protection, some additional layers. You may want to separate out the sources of liability from the assets. So, for example, if you have a construction company, you might want to keep the vehicles and equipment in a separate subsidiary or holding company, the operations in another company, and the employees in a third company. Now, we really wanted to talk a little bit about the legacy of your business. Will your business live on beyond you? And this really does depend a lot on the structure of what kind of form of business you have. You have employees who are relying on the business. If something unexpected happens, it can affect the business. Contracts can be lost. Employees have to be laid off. So it's really important that you address these situations. And what happens if you have a partnership and one of the partners ends up in jail or a medical emergency or has legal travels or dies. Maybe he's traveling out of the country for an extended period of time. Well, the business can't operate the same way it did before, and there can be loss of earnings. So it's important to address all these different issues. And one of the reasons why a lot of businesses fail is because they don't address what we call the 5 Ds. The 5 Ds are death, disability, dementia, divorce, and dissolution of the business. These are the 5 Ds that have to be addressed. And it looks like we lost our screen here. Hold on one second. So the 5 Ds are death, disability, divorce, dementia, and dissolution. Dementia can be any form of dementia. It can be loss of capacity, Alzheimer's, things like that affect you. Dementia is just one form of loss of incapacity. And these types of things, if they're not addressed, really affect the business itself. Now, what happens if one of the business partners, gets divorced? Now you might be in business with their ex-spouse. And, you have to address, should an ex-spouse even be able to own the business? Now, you're going to look at what kind of provisions are in place to transition the business to the next generation. You might look at, in the form of a corporation, you might look at the bylaws in the form of an LLC or the operating agreement. There might be a standalone, what we call a buyout agreement or a buy-sell agreement, or this, might be in your estate plan. Now, you can probably avoid many of the problems and make sure your family's taken care of, and that there's a proper succession plan in place with sound estate planning that takes into account, family business succession. So a few things you need to think about is what happens when you give up control. Plan your retirement around not having income from the business. That's going to keep your financial well-being separated from the business, and it's going to be easier for you to turn over the control of the company that you've built. It's going to make the company and you a lot healthier financially. Talk to your attorney and plan now for your retirement so that you're no longer dependent on the company for the income when you retire. Have you planned for a management transition? Once you retire and decide you're going to go play golf in Florida, who's going to manage the company? Is management going to consist wholly of family members, or do you have employees in key positions who can take over? Have you discussed the possible management structure with your family? Make planning a smooth management transition a part of the estate planning process. The two are not totally separate processes if you own a family business. How do you handle the transfer of assets? This is a really integral part of the estate plan and your family business succession plan. Now, the transfer, it can take place with things like lifetime sales or gifts, or maybe transfer the ownership of the company will only happen when you pass away upon death. You have to ensure that there's enough liquid assets left for you and your spouse to live on in retirement without subjecting and putting the company into potential bankruptcy. Now, who takes over can be, who's going to be the successor to the business. Now, if you have family members in the business, you can consider having family members take over the business. But there's a lot of things you have to think about and be concerned about. Does your entire family work in the business? Have you groomed one of your children to take over? How do the other siblings feel about that? Consider what's going to happen if you leave one child in charge of the business and another child may be in charge of the assets the company relies on. This can bring up, a lot of childhood resentments to the forefront. If siblings feel that one has been favored or slighted over the other, that can cause a lot of problems. And if all your assets are tied together and there's no real harmony, then your company and your family could be destroyed. Now, if there's no family members that can take over, maybe there are some key employees in the business that can be groomed to take over management of the business. This can be structured in what we call a one-way buyout, where the owner agrees to sell the business to a key executive upon the business owner's death, disability, or retirement, and that key employee receives the business. And that means that the children or other heirs are going to have cash. However, the key employee may not have enough assets to purchase the business. So often this type of agreement is structured with life insurance to make sure that the estate and the heirs remain whole and receive cash from the life insurance, and the business executive receives the business. Now, many families just don't want to deal with these issues, but dealing with these issues as complex as these, in the moment of crisis when you die or are rendered unable to make decisions by, illness or injury, can mean disaster for your company. You want to take into account these issues now so you can focus on them now and determine what's important. Look at the big picture for the survival of your family business. It's going to make everyone's life easier. A little painful introspection and thoughtful planning now is going to allow you and your children and your great-grandchildren to be able to enjoy the fruits of your labor. So it's really important to consider this planning. Make sure that you have the right succession plan in place. Don't forget in your planning to consider the 5 Ds, which is death, disability, divorce, dementia, and dissolution. Let's say you have 2 partners, and one of those partners, passes away. Do you really want to be in partnership with their spouse? Or what happens if one of those partners gets divorced? Do you want to be in partnership with their ex-spouse? Well, through proper planning, through a buy-sell, a buyout agreement, you can ensure that these things don't happen. Because you can make sure that, if something happens, that the partner who's passed, their spouse doesn't receive the business, or if they've gotten divorced, the spouse doesn't receive the business and isn't operating in the business, but instead receives cash. But again, there may not be enough profits or enough money, or the partner may not have enough money to pay out the spouse. So oftentimes these things are funded with life insurance. So it's important, again, to make sure that you have both a proper structure in place when you begin to start the business, and that you have a proper succession plan in place, so that all that blood, sweat, and tears that you work so hard to put in place, that create the business that you want to pass on, and make sure that your legacy passes on, and that the business passes on to multiple generations. You have to make sure that you have these things in place, because you never know what's going to happen, when it's going to happen. And let's face it, life does happen. So again, thank you for joining us today. I hope you found this information valuable. We'll come back again next Friday at the same time, and we'll talk about some additional benefits for business owners and individuals, and how to make sure you're getting all the benefits you're entitled to. This is Jerry Kane again. This is Business to Benefits live on the Easy Way TV network, and we will see you next time.